Okay, I'm doing a addendum to the video that I put up on the Ashtiname, the letter supposedly that Muhammad wrote to the monks there in St. Catherine's in Mount Sinai. And it's fascinating to me because I said also in the video that almost all the responses I'm getting from Muslims refer back to this seminal work that was done by John Andrew Morrow. And this is the book that he published. This is his book that he published a number of years ago in 2013. This is not the book here. This is nothing more than the title page of it. I don't have the book myself. I've not read this book. And because so many Muslims were coming to me about it, I asked my good friend, Dr. Mark Durie, if he would give me his review of the book, because he has read the book and he's done a review on it, which he sent me. And I'm going to be referring to his review because I think it's telling some of the things he's pulled out from what John Andrew Morrow said concerning this document, the Ashtiname. Now, remember, in the other video that I put up, I mentioned that the most standard work, the classical work that's been done on the Ashtiname, on these covenants, and not just on that one, but on all the covenants, was done by a German in 1980 named Bernhard Moritz. John Andrew Morrow, evidently he either didn't read the book, possibly he doesn't know German, but he had not anything good to say about Moritz, and it's obviously he didn't know much about what the argumentation against the Ashtiname by Moritz. Remember in the video that I put up earlier, I mentioned that Moritz saw this as a fraud because of the dating on it, also the style on it, and also the contents. And he refers to the problem with the minarets on the side. He refers with the kind of language that was used, that the Arabic was a much later Arabic. It's not the Arabic from the 7th century from that part of the world. It was Christian Arabic, medieval Arabic. And he gave quite a few comments on why this could not have been written that early, and that it was more likely that the Ashtiname was written in the 16th century during the time of Selim I. Now, what's fascinating, none of this came out in Morrow's criticism of Moritz. What did Morrow say about Moritz? Well, he says, first of all, that Moritz's criticism was without foundation, but he doesn't say why. He doesn't go into why it's without foundation. He doesn't give any counterbalances. He doesn't give any counter arguments. He doesn't give any suppositions of what his view is compared to Moritz. He just said it's without foundation. And then he goes into, according to what Durie tells, he goes into a long ad hominem attack against Moritz for being a Muslim-hating German spy. That's fascinating. And then he says, for example, Morrow called him, Moritz, a man who wanted Muslims to kill and persecute Christians. And as Durie says, there's just bile after bile that comes out against Moritz. But he doesn't really engage with the material. He doesn't even engage with the arguments. And this is what's fascinating to me. If you're not going to engage with the material, if you're not going to engage with the arguments of your adversary, don't just sit there and call them names. That's not going to help your case. It's going to weaken your case. And I think this is the problem that Morrow has. He then goes on and says, and Durie was kind of surprised by this. He then went on and said that his was the only work that had been done on this. His was the only real study. There was no serious repudiation of the covenant has ever been formulated. And to me, when I heard that and when Durie wrote that, I said, wait a minute, this doesn't sound correct. I mean, in just the video that I put up yesterday, I gave 6 different opinions, 6 different studies that have been done. One by Bernhard Moritz that we've already mentioned, another by Mubashir Hussein. I gave you his conclusions. Dr. Pat Andrews is another one. Dr. Mark Durie, who's one I'm using tonight. Amidou Olalekan Sani's, and also Gabriel St. Reynolds. I gave you all of their opinions and their conclusions on whether or not this was a real letter from Muhammad. So to go off and say that no serious repudiation of the covenant has been done, as if his is the only one that has been done, the only study that is of note, suggests to me that what he is saying is because of the fact that they repudiate this as genuine, therefore it's not serious. Whereas mine, because I accept it as a letter from Muhammad, Mine is the only one that is serious. Interesting. That shows to me that this man is really only talking to himself, possibly, and to a lot of Muslims. Because it's fascinating. When I went up on site, I went on and I wanted to find out, when I was studying and doing some research on the Ashtiname, I tried to find out all the different sites that had references to it. And every time I came to a Muslim reference of this letter, they always kept on saying, go back to John Andrew Morrow's book on the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christian of the world. Go and read that, because that's the definitive work on this subject. So let's go ahead and unpack his analysis. And again, I'm getting this from Mark Durie. This is what he's come up with. That's fascinating. He mentioned a number of things. Strategically, Durie says, whenever Mark Andrew Morrow, let's just call him Morrow for short, whenever Morrow looked at a reference that favored Muhammad, it was seen, he saw that as fact. Whenever there was something that was unfavorable to Muhammad in his, and it wasn't just the Ashtiname, he was talking about many things, many of the letters, and going back to his biography, and anything that suggested that was unfavorable, he would always say alleged. This is an alleged fact. This is an alleged event. Okay, take the incident of the genocide of the Qurayza, which he called was an allegation only, nothing more than an allegation. And he says the obstinate male members of the tribe are alleged to have been beheaded, while the women and the children were reduced to slavery. So that's not a fact. That's nothing more than alleged. It's alleged. The irony is, who is the one that even wrote the story? Isn't it fascinating that the sources for the story of the genocide do not come from any Jews? They come from Muslims themselves, his own people. So evidently, he's not giving much credence to even their writings. Now, it was fascinating because Durie goes on and says that when Muhammad threatened the Banu Qurayza, which is another one of the three Jewish tribes that were there in Medina, when he threatened them to become Muslims or face the same fate as the Quraysh, which means death, Morrow then criticizes the Jews for not responding tactfully. And as Durie opines in his review to me that he sent to me, he says, well, how does one respond tactfully to death threats? If it's either die or do, what are you going to do? You're going to do. You're not going to die. And the fact that they refused to, they actually refused, and they were thrown out. The Kainuka were thrown out up to Khaybar in the north. And he describes the Jews in Medina as treacherous treaty breakers. Now, Durie didn't go into that, but we're going to be talking about the Treaty of Medina, the Constitution of Medina. That's another one of the videos that I'm preparing right now. And if you take a look at the Constitution of Medina, you will see that the three names that should be on that treaty, there are Jewish names on it, individuals here and there, but the three major tribes, the Banu Kainuka, the Banu Nadir, and the Banu Qurayza family, those three names are not on that treaty. So when Morrow says these treacherous treaty breakers, they never signed that treaty. And you're going to see when we unpack that treaty why they didn't sign it. And you can see that that treaty is obviously a much later reference. It's nothing to do with Muhammad. Durie was a little concerned also with how he dealt with Rayhana. Rayhana, for those of you who know, is one of the wives. She wasn't originally a wife of Muhammad. She was actually from the Kainuka family, the Jewish family. She was a Jewish, and she watched her husband, who she loved very much, being killed. And then when Muhammad, because she was beautiful, when Muhammad offered her his hand in marriage, she refused to do so, because in order for her to be married to Muhammad, she would have to convert to Islam. And she did not want to convert to Islam. She remained a Jew. Now, later on in life, she did finally acquiesce. And what was fascinating, according to Morrow, according to Morrow, what Morrow said on this, he says, one such captive, Rayhana bint Zayd ibn Amr, married the Messenger of Allah and eventually embraced Islam. That's all he says about it, that whole event. Durie was furious with this. Dr. Mark Durie is furious, and he said, this is akin to what you're seeing today, just in 2014 with the Yazidi women. Look and see, they also had their menfolk killed, they had their husbands, their fathers, their brothers killed, and they were then taken as sex slaves. And the same thing is happening to Rehana. And to just slough it off as saying, this is uneventful, this is all that happened, and later on that she married them, she married him. In this case, you might say the same thing with the Yazidi women. They were all forced to marry in the case of the ISIS and what happened just a few years ago. And then he opines about the Jews, and he says they rejected Muhammad for racist reasons. And though he doesn't explain that, what do you mean racist reasons? We're going to talk about the Constitution of Medina. You're going to see why the Jews rejected Muhammad. They reject from Muhammad the same reason I would reject Muhammad, the same reason most of you who are listening to me would reject Muhammad. When you read the Treaty of Medina, when you read the Constitution of Medina, you will see that is no constitution that I would want to sign or that you would want to sign. Nonetheless, they rejected Muhammad because of racist reason. It was the only the only opinion that he could come from that. He mentions in his book, The Covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, that Islam afforded protection for members of minorities. And Durie says that if you take a look at if you take a look and see what Muslims did almost everywhere they went, this was not protection. This is brutal occupation of native people over and over and over again. On page 62, he gives the example of the Umayyad Caliph who returned a church to the Christians that they had taken away originally and returned back to the Christians. And Morrow says this as proof that Muhammad was good to Christians. He said, if this is how the Umayyads, the most wretched rulers of Islam, behaved, one can only imagine the exalted treatment of the Prophet and Imam Ali reserved for their subjects. So he takes that event that happened to the Umayyad Caliphate, which is in 661 up to 749. So that Umayyad Caliphate, that happens about 30 years after Muhammad's death. And he says, because of the fact that they gave this church back to the Christians, this shows how much greater Muhammad must be. And also Imam Ali, which suggests to me, and also I think Mark Durie agrees with this, that our good friend John Andrew Morrow is a Shiite. What are the scholars' assessment of Morrow? I could only get two. One was Dr. Mark Durie's, and the other was Gabriel said Reynolds. Let me just read their assessment. Durie concludes this way, and he says, this is a disturbing book, pious, hateful propaganda, and not a work devoted to telling the truth in love. Not much of an assessment at all. Gabriel said Reynolds' review of the book says this: the translator, John Andrew Morrow, an author of the Encyclopedia of Islamic Herbal Medicine, insists that they are all genuine, and that means the Ashtiname and the other covenants, and prove decisively that Islam is tolerant of Christianity. His excitement is shared by the Muslim perennialist philosopher Charles Upton, who declares in the foreword that this book will lead to a new alliance between those of the Abrahamic faiths who are dedicated to preserving the divine revelations entrusted to them both from traitors within their midst. Evidently, his interest, according to Gabriel said Reynolds, in arguing for the authenticity of these covenants is not unlike the interest of those who forged them in the first place, referring to the monks. And so it was very clear to Gabriel said Reynolds that he had an agenda here, that it was obvious that he had an agenda in elevating these covenants, not just the one, the Ashtiname, but the other 11 or 10 that he refused to accept as inauthentic. And the agenda was very clear, and you can see what the agenda is. Since 9/11, all Muslims who are in the West, like Morrow, would like to see Islam, would like to perceive Islam as a religion of peace, would like to see Muhammad as a man of peace, would like to see the Quran as a book of peace, and they're bending over backwards to find any way to bring that about. So you can understand then why people like Morrow will try to elevate this as an authentic piece of article, but it's not at all from the 7th century at all. As I said in the last video, everything, the internal proof, certainly the style of writing, just the environment, the fact that it refers to things that could not have existed in the 7th century, that existed much, much later, proves that this is a much later writing. It's a fraud, really. It's a forgery, put together by the monks who were there surrounded by Muslims and were being persecuted. This is during the time of Salim I in the 16th century. And when you're under persecution, you can understand why they would want a letter like this that would have the name of Muhammad on it to give it authority and give it credibility. So they thought. I don't know if it worked or not, but nonetheless, we need to put it where it is. Now, my assessment then of John Andrew Morrow. Well, first of all, it's obviously that he did not engage with probably the standard work on this. He should have engaged with Bernhard Moritz a little bit better. He should have at least tried to argue and bring arguments that would go back and forth from what Morrow is doing. That's what I'm doing right now. You notice I have to engage with what is being said. I'm engaging with what the different groups are. I'm engaging. We have to do that. And if anybody who is doing an assessment of any piece of literature or anything that is being written, you need to engage with those who have a different view. That's called peer review. And he didn't peer review. He didn't actually engage with Moritz. He seems to think that he is the only study. And I think maybe because he has been lauded. We said this about David King earlier, Al-Fadi and I, when we were looking at David King's reaction to Gibson. David King did the same thing that Morrow's doing to Moritz. David King called Gibson all kinds of terrible words, names, just belittling him, vitriol, reference after reference of how this man did not have a degree, he did not study under him, he was not somebody that would understand. He just understand math. I mean, he just went on. And you see the same thing, it looks like, that Morrow's doing with Moritz, the only man he really should have engaged with. He just really used ad hominem. And once you use ad hominem, from my experience, once anybody, anytime, and like this happens with me when I get into debates, it happens with me when I get in discussion with Muslims, once they get away from the material and start attacking your character, you pretty much know they've lost the debate. Because that's usually the default. Whenever you do lose the debate, you default back on attacking the messenger, attacking the person in front of you. And that seems to be what Morrow has done here with Moritz and also the others that he didn't even try to engage with. He was not even aware that there were other studies that had been done on the Ashtiname. And if he was aware, he certainly didn't accept them, and possibly because they didn't agree with him. And since they didn't agree with them, he didn't give any credibility to them. And that's not right. You need to at least see where the other studies are and what their conclusions are. It's obvious that he does not like Jews. And I'm wondering why this happens. There just seems to be an abundance hatred of Jews everywhere you look. And I'm not sure, and maybe you Muslims could help me out, why is it that there's this innate vitriolic hatred, visceral hatred of Jews? And it certainly comes out in his writing concerning some very, very dastardly pieces of literature, some very dastardly events that Muhammad was doing according to his own traditions there in Medina with the Banu Kainuka, the Banu Nadir, and the Banu Qurayza family. And it's obvious to me that those who have read the Covenants of the Prophets by John Andrew Murray were not impressed with his assessment. Not only Durie was not impressed, certainly Gabriel said Reynolds was not impressed at all. And this bothers me, and I'm going to end with this, and I think I don't need to go any further. I think when you read these kinds of books that are supposedly academic, they're supposed to be assess a piece of literature, in this case the Ashtiname, and they're supposed to look and see what else has been written by other scholars. And when they come across deriding the scholars rather than dealing with their information and rather than engaging with their ideas, just to attack their character. And you see a well and respected, certainly in the Muslim community, he certainly is respected in the Muslim community, John Morrow. But when you see this kind of attack instead of engagement, it depresses me because if this is what the best that Islam has, if he is the best they've got in this area, this young man from Canada, convert to Islam himself, if that's the best they got, then it depresses me to realize that is this all we're going to get from Islam? Is this the kind of response we're going to get? Just vitriol and attack and name calling. Because that doesn't help the rest of us, and it doesn't help all those of us who are trying to see if Muslims are able to be self-critical. Is this possible for any Muslims to take any object and try to assess it historically using empirical evidence? We're asking them to use empirical evidence, not to come to conclusions and then just build upon those conclusions, to try to at least look and see whether or not these documents do fit the right place, the right time, and the right people with the right events. In this case, it doesn't. In almost every category, this document, the Ashtiname, does not fit the right place or the right people at the right time, and certainly not the right event. So I hope we get something better than this book here. There's got to be better assessments of the Ashtiname than that which John Andrew Morrow has done. Please, Muslims, do a better job than that. Come up with some type of defense. And I'm still asking, is there anything from the 7th century that you can give me? Is there anything that you can afford me? Anything that you can show me that supports either Muhammad, letters that he has written that can be proved to be 7th century, not from the 16th century, redacted back, inscriptions, possibly artifacts, any manuscripts? We've been asking this for a long time. I'm still waiting. Okay, I think that's enough of trying to assess this Covenants of Prophet Muhammad by Jonathan Andrew Morrow. This is Jay here in my office. Hope you all are having a good lockdown, and I also hope you're keeping safe. This is Jay then.